I prefer to use small sharp scissors, and if you feel nervous doing this, I do as well. It's one thing doing it on a little practice piece, it does feel a bit scarier to do it for real. Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns. I teach knitting workshops in person and online, and I sell yarn through my website YarnAddict.co.uk. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Welcome if you're new here, and welcome if you're a returning viewer. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. It helps me a lot to build my channel. Today we're going to talk about this cardigan, which is in the latest issue of Let's Knit magazine. It is a steeked cardigan, but it is knitted in such a way that if you don't want to steek it, you don't have to. So traditionally, in some knitting traditions, there will be, when you steek something, that basically means you're going to cut down the center front. Depending on the construction of the garment, you can also cut a hole for the sleeves, but this has a circular yoke construction, so the cardigan is knitted from the top down in the round, all in one piece. And then when you get to the underarms, you split off the stitches for the sleeves and the body, and you knit body and the sleeves separately to the length you wanted. So these have got 3/4 length sleeves. If you want longer sleeves, you can easily make the sleeves longer. Just try the cardigan or the sweater on as you go. You will of course need more yarn for that, but not a lot of more yarn. Probably one, maybe 2 balls of the main color should be fine, so you can easily make it longer if you want to. It is, I appreciate that steeking can be a little bit intimidating, and I would recommend you practice on some swatches before you do it for real. So if you are worried about steeking, or you don't want it as a cardigan, you can actually just keep it as a sweater. The most things that are going to be steeked in most traditions, not in all traditions. In Norway, I think it's less common, or at least it was when I lived in Norway. I grew up in Norway, and when I was a teenager, I knitted steeked garments from loads of Norwegian patterns, and they didn't have those extra steek stitches that are more common in other knitting traditions. But quite often when you have a steek, you will have some stitches in the center here, which are knitted in like a checkerboard fashion, or pinstripes. So you'd have a few extra stitches in the center. Because this only has color work on the yoke and the rest is stocking stitch, I decided not to add those stitches for the steek. That was a deliberate decision. It also means that if you'd rather keep this as a sweater, you can just keep it as a sweater. You don't have to do anything. You can just knit it, and that's it. You can put it on, and it's all there as a sweater. And if you want to turn it into a cardigan, you can just get your scissors out and cut. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I reinforce the fabric before I cut it. So I used a crochet reinforcement. You do not have to be an expert crocheter or even able to crochet to do this. I have taught it in my classes to loads of people who've never held a crochet hook before. It is easier if you know how to use a crochet hook. You can choose between slip stitch crochet and double crochet, and I'll show you both in this video. I always use slip stitch crochet, and I think if you're new to crochet, that's probably easier. And then once you've crocheted the seam either side of where you're going to cut, you're then going to get your scissors out and cut, and then you pick up stitches and knit the button band on afterwards. I knitted the button band in the corrugated rib to match the rest of the garment, and I have a separate tutorial for how I do the buttonholes. They're a little bit more difficult to do with the corrugated rib. I do something called a 1-row buttonhole, and they are a bit more challenging with a corrugated rib. If you don't want to steek it or cut it, you can just leave it as a sweater and it will work perfectly fine. That's why I chose to not add extra steek stitches to where I was going to cut it, because then if you want to keep it as a sweater, that would make it very difficult. So this sweater was partially knitted by my sample knitter and partially knitted by me. My sample knitter knitted most of it top down till about, well, till here where that marker is, and then she ran out of yarn because I hadn't ordered enough yarn, so I had to wait for more yarn to come. I actually had enough yarn to get down to about here, so I only needed partial ball of the blue. I had enough of the orange. So when I asked my sample knit to put a marker in the center stitch on the yoke. Hang on, there you go. I asked her to put a marker in the center stitch on the yoke, about halfway through the yoke, and then when I got it back, when I put the stitches back on the needle, I put a marker in the center stitch of the front where I started, and then I put a couple more down. Most steeked garments will have something called steek stitches. It'll be usually about 5 to 7 stitches that will be knitted in like a checkerboard pattern. I decided not to do that for this one because most of it is just plain stocking stitch in one color. And in Norway, where I come from, adding steek stitches isn't all that common, or at least it didn't used to be when I lived there. It may have changed in recent years, I don't know. But you don't need the steek stitches. It does make it a little bit easier. You do need to know where the center of your garment is. But apart from that, you don't really need the steek stitches. But they do make it easier. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to find the center stitch all the way up. So I'm going to get out some more of these padlock markers. You can also use a thread of yarn in a different color. So a few years ago, I had to alter. My husband's had a sweater that my mum knitted for him that was a bit too big, so I altered it, and I just I basically cut it at the sides of the sweater because it was knitted in the round, so I cut it at the side of the sweater to cut like a section of fabric at the sides to make the body smaller. And in order to work out where to cut, I just ran a thread of yarn up through the stitches in a contrasting color, and that worked fine. But this time I'm actually going to put these markers in, so I know that's the center stitch, so I'm just going to follow that up. It just makes it easier to make sure I am keeping to a straight line. So it might be easier if you use a knitting needle or something to just kind of follow this line up. So we got it here, and then there, and then there, and then we're going to go in there. If you don't have these markers, you can use a bit of yarn, different color from what you're knitting with, or you can just get some yarn in a different color and basically like sew it in and out, just loosely so you can see it. Running stitch, is that what it's called? You don't need to put these too frequently. More frequently they are, the easier it'll be. If you can hear tapping on the floor, it's just my dog walking around. I think I'm put those in too close together actually. I don't really need that. Right, one there. You can also do this while you're knitting. So I asked my sample knitter to put a marker in halfway through the yoke. I probably should have asked her to actually do this all the way down. That would have probably made more sense, I think. Have I got any more? Oh, there we go. I'll do a couple of more. and then into that orange stitch there. There we go. So that is, we've got a line all the way up now in the center, and then you need to decide how wide you want the steek to be. I don't want the steek to be too wide because it'll take out a lot of fabric. Obviously the fabric we cut I will replace because we'll be knitting a button band to cover it, so we will be replacing some of that. But I'm kind of thinking, how many stitches either side is that? 1. So it's that orange stitch there, so I'm kind of thinking this blue and orange stitch there. Or no, I think I will play on the safe side and go, so that'll be 1, 2, 3. We'll go for that stitch. Now when you crochet, when you're doing it up here, you can just go into 2 adjoining legs from each stitch down here, because 1 stitch is crochet, down here because 1 stitch is a knit stitch, 1 stitch is a purl stitch. It's a little bit more difficult. You just have to make sure, I'm obviously going to start right at the bottom, but I'll just show you this before I start. So you have to make sure that you go through this loop here, but then for the purl stitch you have to actually kind of like almost dig down and grab the knit, the leg from the knit stitch here. So obviously the purl stitch is a knit stitch on the other side, so you have to kind of grab that leg but from the right side of the fabric. So I'm going to go through like that and then yarn over. So you just go inside the cast off edge, yarn over the hook and pull it through, and then yarn over the hook and pull it through. And then I'm going to start going up here. Now you have to make sure you go into each row. If you miss a row, your knitting may unravel. So I'm going to go into the first pair of legs, which are both orange. So that first orange was the loop I had on my hook, the one that's under my finger, and then I got those 2 loops is the stitch. So yarn over the hook and pull it through those 2 loops, and then I'm going to pull the first loop through the second loop. I'm going to do something called slip stitch crochet because I prefer that. You can do double crochet if you prefer. And then I'm going to go into the next pair of legs, so make sure I catch a blue one and an orange one, yarn over, pull it through. If you do double crochet, you take the yarn over the hook and then pull it through both loops. But I'm just going to pull the first loop through the second loop. Then I'm going to, I show both methods by the way in more detail in my online Scandinavian stranded colourwork and steeking course. I show both methods. Go into the next, hang on, yes, go into the next row, yarn over the hook, pull it through, pull the first hook through the second hook. Now I'm using DK yarn and I'm using 2.5mm crochet hook. It's knitted on 4mm needles, but you want to use a hook that's quite a bit smaller than what you would do if you were going to knit. It doesn't have to be a 2.5mm, but I would say between 2.5mm and 3mm, because especially if you're a loose crochet, because you don't want this to be too loose. So I'm going to go in there. This is a little bit tricky because the blue leg is kind of on the wrong side of the fabric, so you have to kind of dig down and pull it up if you like. So just take it nice and slow. You're not going into the purl bumps at all, you're just going into the vertical legs. And you want to make sure you're doing it fairly tight. You don't want your crochet to be too loose. it becomes a lot easier when we get to the stocking stitch section. The most difficult section is this section where we have rib, and you have to really make sure that you don't skip a row, because then you may be in trouble. You can, if you wanted to, I didn't think about it when I was knitting the rib at the bottom, but you can make the stitches that you're going to use for the steek stitches, you can make those stocking stitch, so just do every other stitch as a knit stitch rather than knit and purl. So from here to here you can do those blue stitches as knit stitches instead of purl stitches. That makes it slightly easier, but I didn't think about that when I was doing the ribbing. But if you're watching this before you knit the rib, or if you're willing to re-knit the rib, you can definitely do the stitches that you're going to steek or you're going to crochet. You can do the stitches as knit stitches rather than purl stitches, because that makes this a little bit easier. There we go. Okay, now we've finished the rib, so now we're just going to do stocking stitch. This is where you have to be a little bit careful to make sure you stay in a straight line. So I'm going to just check how many rows I am away from that marked stitch. So I'm 1, 2, 3. I'm going into stitch number 3 and 4. I like to fold the fabric so that the 2 legs that I'm going through are at the top of the ridge, so I can just go in like that, and I kind of pinch those 2 legs between my thumb and my middle finger. If you hold the yarn in your right hand, you can pinch it like that. It just depends on how you, or if you hold the yarn like that, it just depends on how you hold the yarn. But I hold the yarn, hang on, in my, what was I doing? I hold the yarn of my index fingers. I'm pinching with my thumb and my middle finger. So I'm going to just crochet all the way up here. Just make sure you stay in that straight line. I'll show you more what it looks like on the back in a minute. So I'm going to just quickly crochet up to the top, and then I'll come and show you what I've done. Okay, so as you get closer, because the yoke is obviously shaped with increases, before, after the rib, before here and here, I think, after the color work. So here I have 1, 2, 2.5 stitches away from the marker. Up here it's much closer to the marker. So just bear that in mind when you are choosing where to crochet. If you go too close to the marker down here, you'll be even closer to the marker up here. Okay, so I've got right up to the top here now. I'm on the rib at the top. I just have a couple of stitches, hang on. Just have a couple of stitches left, a couple of rows left to do. It does get a little bit tricky all the way up at the top here, so just be very, very careful. It's quite tight up here. Oh. Okay, so when you're absolutely sure you've gone through the last row, you can then go through the edge, the cast on edge. So you go under the cast on edge, pull up a loop, pull it through, and then, hang on, take the yarn over the hook and pull it through again, just so you fasten it over the top edge like you did at the bottom. I don't know whether that's really necessary, but I've always done it like that. Break the yarn and then pull it through. So that's the first edge done, and now we're going to do the second edge. So I'm going to do the second edge in the other direction so that the this bit kind of folds the same way, if you like. Don't know if that makes sense, but so I'm going to start up here, and I have to be a bit more careful here because I'm closer to the line here. So I'm going to 1, 2, 3. So it's number 4. Hang on. Yeah, so it's, let's get some yarn. It is here. So I'm going to go under the cast on edge because this was knitted top down, so this is the cast on edge. And then pull up a loop and then yarn over the hook and pull it through, and then just pull the tail to tighten it. Right. Okay, so I'm going to start by going in here. So the first row is 2 orange and through, and then there we go. Oh. One more. That's the orange bit, and then I'm going to carry on for the blue bit, and the blue bit is a lot easier. So I'm going to just go and sit in my comfy chair and do this because it is more comfortable than sitting here and doing it, and then I'll come back and show you what we're going to do to cut it. Okay, so I've crocheted all the way up, and as I said, it does get narrower up here because of the decreases in the yoke, or rather increases, because it's knitted from the top down. So as you work through the yoke, there are some increases. So you're a little bit closer to the center line here, but that's fine. So now we're going to cut. Now do double check that you haven't got any ends close to the center line. I would avoid joining in a new yarn around the center front, because it makes it a bit difficult if you want to when it comes to cutting. So you can see that's what it looks like on the inside. And this is what I meant by working one line from the bottom and one from the top, because then this orange line kind of face each other. Doesn't matter whether it faces out or in, but I like it to face the same way. Okay, so just going to take these ends out of the way and then work out where the center is. So we can take these markers out now. I'm going to just take them out as I go. I prefer to use small sharp scissors. I wouldn't use big scissors because I think it's more risky that you might go the wrong way. So I like to use small sharp scissors. These are quite pointy. Okay, so we're going up that center orange line. And if you feel nervous doing this, I do as well. It's one thing doing it on a little practice piece. It does feel a bit scarier to do it for real. So you can just go few rows at a time. Just take it nice and slow and make sure you stay in the center of that stitch. Let's just take out a couple of these because they're quite close together here. Now be careful that you obviously don't cut through the fabric at the back. So I lift it up because I obviously don't want to cut through the fabric at the back. That would be a bit of a disaster. Right, let's hang on. Not that easy to actually do this around the camera. There we go. That might be a bit easier to hold it like this. Now be very careful when you get up to the yoke section, because remember what I said, the gap between the crochet seam and the center line narrows a little bit, so just be careful here that you go right up the center, because you don't want to get too close to where you've crocheted. And here obviously you have the floats on the back as well. Nail it there now. Make sure I just aim straight for the center of that orange stitch. And then just make sure I don't cut through. I want to weave in these ends later, so I just want to make sure I don't cut through them. There we go. So you see you got the cut edge here. We can neaten that up a bit later on. But for now, we're going to just leave that, and then the next bit is the pick-up stitches. So the pick-up stitches, you need a needle. I recommend using a circular needle because I think that's easier. I'm going to pick up stitches in the blue because I'm going to knit the rib as a corrugator rib, like the other ribs. And the other, it starts kind of with the blue here, and then it ends with the, or this started with the orange because it was the cast on, but the blue kind of goes into the blue of the fabric, of the main fabric. I don't know if that makes sense. So if I pick up with the orange, then I'm going to get like a row of orange stitches, and I don't want that. Now we want to come at least half a stitch in from the crochet edge. So I'm going to go start all the way up here, go through the fabric to the back, and then I'm going to use the blue color. Now you can make a I'm not going to do that on this one, I don't think, but you can actually make something called a steak sandwich, which covers the cut edge completely. You can also get ribbons to cover the cut edge. Now you want to make sure you go right up to the top edge here, and the key is to, hang on, it's a little bit difficult with the first one. I find it easier if I keep the yarn I'm picking up, so the working yarn, fairly tight. I hope the light is still okay. It's starting to go a bit dark now. Okay, in like that, and then into the next stitch. And you want to pick up a few quite close together at the top edge and the bottom edge. And then for the rest of it, you obviously need to follow what the pattern says, and I haven't actually worked out the different pickup ratios yet, but you want to do roughly about 3 stitches every 4 rows, but at the top here I do it a bit closer because I want to make sure it goes right to the edge. Normally if I'm doing what's called a steak sandwich, I make sure that this edge is kind of free, if you like. At the moment I'm actually going to go through it because that will help to like pin it down a little bit. So at the top I'm picking up 1 stitch for every row, and then a bit further down we're going to start doing, it'll work out roughly 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So we'll do 3 in a row, and then we'll skip a row, and then we'll do 3 again. So I'm going to stop filming there, and then I'll come back and show you the final result. So this is the finished result after I picked up stitches and added a corrugated rib button band. I would say it is easier to add a regular rib button band, but I think if you can do a regular 1x1 rib button band, you'd want to do that around the neckline, the sleeves, and the hem down here as well, so all the hems look the same. The buttonholes are a bit easy if you do 1x1 rib, but let's just have a look at what the steeking looks like on the inside. So as you can see the cut edge. It doesn't look particularly attractive. I would recommend putting a ribbon over there, or knitting a strip, just a strip in stocking stitch. That's kind of this way, so you can stitch it to here and here, and if you just kind of slip stitches in place, you can buy ribbons. I did buy some ribbon, but it's just a little bit not quite wide enough, and because of deadlines and things, I need to get this in the post. I just haven't had time to do it, but that's what one side looks like. Now anything that unravels that's on the cut side of the crochet seam, you don't have to worry about, because that's not going to unravel and go through the cut seam, hopefully. You can trim this a little bit if you find it a bit too long, but you be careful about trimming it too close to where the crochet seam is. This is the other side. I did start trimming some of these bits off, but I wasn't happy with how it looked, so I stopped it. Let me just unbutton these last couple of buttons so you can see what it's like up here with the where the color work is. So I did have a problem on one side, on this side. There were some longer strands. Let me just, so on this side there were some longer strands that were, if they're on the cut side of the crochet seam, it's fine, like these are, because these were the ones I actually wove in. But there were some that were on the fabric, on the cardigan side, if you like, of the cut seam. There were some long floats that were loose. They were quite long, like about that long, I think. It is worth, and I didn't tell my sample knitter to do this, and I should have done, so it's my fault, but it is worth, for the section at the center of the front where you're going to be steeking when you're doing the color work, to catch the yarn, weave in the yarn, or catch it at the back of the floats, like here. It is worth doing that more frequently at the center front where you're going to be cutting, because then you reduce the risk of these long floats. So I had some long floats here which I wove in. I did it last night and the light just wasn't good enough to film, so I didn't film it, I'm afraid. But there were some slightly longer floats here and I was just very careful with them, and then I wove them into this crochet seam, and that's why there's these ends here. They are woven in because they were loose. So it's only like 3 or 4 of them. So if you do get any kind of loose ends on the fabric side, on the cardigan side, if you like, of the cut edge, not on the cut side, just be very careful with them till you finish the button band, and then just weave them into this kind of seam allowance here, and it'll be fine. If you have any questions about this design, please leave your comments below this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. And I will link the video I've done on 1-row buttonholes specifically for a corrugated rib. I'll link that below this video. I've done that as a separate video just so I can use it for other designs in the future if I need to. So I'll link that as a separate video below this video. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing, and I will see you in my next video. Thank you for watching.